Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. We've got some malicious compliance stories and our first story of the day is by Eat a Peach 18. Ask me to slow down while driving through my neighborhood? Okay. I live in a very quiet suburban neighborhood with lots of active neighbors. Joggers, bikers, dog walkers, baby strollers, kids playing ball in the streets, etc. The speed limit is 25 miles per hour, but when I see lots of foot traffic on the sidewalks, I bring it down to 15 miles per hour or even 10 if I see a big group of kids playing in the street. There's this sweet group of kids who play basketball in the middle of the street 8 doors down from my home. When they see cars approaching, they move to the curb and wait for the cars to pass before resuming their game. One day, I was driving home from work and I saw the kids out playing and their mother was on the front lawn talking with another adult. I slowed down to 10 miles per hour and went to the complete opposite side of the street as I crept by. A little while later, she knocked on my door and complained about how fast I was driving and that I could have harmed her precious children. I said, the speed limit is 25 miles per hour and I was going 10 miles per hour. How much slower do you want me to go? She said, I don't care, just slow down or else I'm going to call the police. I have a doorbell camera so I can see you every time you drive by. Okay, crazy lady, whatever you say. The next day, the kids were outside playing in the street again. I slowly approached, came to a full stop, and then I took my foot off the brakes and let the car crawl at 1 mile per hour. The kids stared at me all confused as it took me an entire minute to pass through their makeshift basketball court. I continued to do this a few more times until one day, the mother came and knocked on my car window as I was crawling by. I lowered my window and asked if there was a problem. She said, Why are you going so slow? Are you stalking my children? I said, No, of course not. You demanded that I slow down, so I am. And I rolled up my window and went on my way. She comes banging on my door again and says, Don't get smart with me, now you're going too slow. I said, Are you saying that going 10 miles per hour is okay now? Because if you don't like it, you can call the police. She huffed and crossed her arms and stomped off my porch. Let me ask you guys, how fast or slow is the right speed on a street that has children playing basketball on it? Is 10 miles an hour an acceptable speed, or should you go less to 5, or is even a little bit more, around 15 okay? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Personally, if all the kids clear out of the street, 10 miles an hour is completely fine, and maybe even a little bit more as long as you make sure they are really out of the street. Our next story is by Shinjuku42. That's not your job. Okay. I used to work for a company that offered degrees you could do parallel to your job at a university. For example, you could do a master's degree in business part-time and still work. Often the companies would pay for their workers' studies. I was in marketing and was basically alone. I had a boss who called herself head of marketing but had clearly no idea what she was doing. On top of this, she worked only part-time and would spend her time walking around telling everyone how much she had to do instead of doing her job. At some point, she was told to do a flyer for a new program we wanted to offer. Not being able to work with InDesign or Photoshop, she told me to do it and give her the files she could send to the printer. However, since it's her project and she didn't want the big boss to know I did her work for her, she told me that I should just use the pictures and text she provided and make it look exactly the way she had pieced it together in a PowerPoint file. She regularly did this and it really pissed me off, so I did exactly what she asked. I used her text, which was full of typos, used the pictures, which were way too small for print, and also had watermarks in them since she only downloaded the preview pics from the stock website. So I designed it to look how she had envisioned it, put the text in without correcting any of it, turned it into a print PDF and sent it to her. She claimed she had looked at it and it was perfect, but since she didn't have the time, yeah sure, I should send it off to the printer. Well, 1 week later the flyers arrive, just in time for the first big event where we needed them. And they looked like crap. Pixelated pictures with watermarks, typos in the headline and text, you get the picture. Our big boss was furious and she tried to blame it on me. However, I had saved all our conversations and all the original files she gave me and just handed all that over before going about my work. I quit a few months afterwards. As far as I know, she's still working there. However, she's not head of anymore and has to show everything she does to two superiors now. It sounds like this lady is the epitome of fake it till you make it and not representing that saying in a good way. Our next story is by Utahna. Waitress complies with manager's unsanitary decision. This is actually my mother-in-law's story. It occurred in the late 70s. She was working as a waitress in a small restaurant. One day during the lunch rush, she drops a plate of food on the floor in the kitchen. She asks the cook to prep a replacement when the manager comes over, picks up the food off the floor, puts it back on the plate, and tells her that there is nothing wrong with it and to go serve it. She protests, but it's been on the floor. The manager tells her, "Go serve this plate or you're fired." So she takes the order out to the table and sets it down in front of the customer and announces loudly enough that the entire restaurant can hear, "Here's your food, but I wouldn't eat it if I were you. I dropped it on the floor, but my manager told me to serve it to you anyway." She turns around, toodles back over to her manager, smiles at him and says, "I quit." As she turns around to leave, the entire dining room is pushing back from their tables and leaving without paying. Although this took place in the 70s, hearing these kinds of stories actually happen in restaurants really kind of makes you worry about what could have happened in your past dining experiences. At least it does for me. I don't know if I'm paranoid or overthinking or what, but it's not a fun time thinking about that stuff. Our next story is by Real E. Parker. Accuse me of trying to steal your job? Try replacing 50% of sales. I work for a mid-sized office product supply company in sales and sales management. The specifics don't matter for the story, but what does is that we have a small, local sales team and a centralized accounting department at corporate headquarters. So this all started when my colleague made an error that required her to rapidly send documents to corporate accounting, which was a 2-hour drive away. I offered to discreetly do it the next morning because I'm a team player and I'd already hit my sales objective for the month. Also, I think this is just sort of the expected role of managing people and keeping them happy, even though she wasn't my direct report. The next morning, I get up early to do this and I end up arriving at work a few minutes late. Nothing out of the ordinary for everyone else, but I'm usually very punctual. One of my newer salesmen, who I'll add was already a poor performer and probably wouldn't be long for this company, noticed this and I guess went to my car and saw the parking receipt in the window. At this point, I'll bring up that the company wasn't in great financial health, which had led to quite a bit of infighting and management turnover and even layoffs, so nobody was feeling fully secure in their roles. Continuing the story, my subordinate goes to our office's lead manager and points this out, indicating that perhaps I had gone to interview for his job. Of course, that was absurd, but when confronted by two people who were honestly both inferior to me in performance and ability, I just kinda snapped. Rather than deny the accusations, I just quit right then and there because honestly, I was working too hard and knew that better options existed. I'd been staying mostly out of some misplaced loyalty, and this was just the last straw. This is where it gets good. Because I had been managing the sales team and I had been doing at least 50% of sales for the entire office, the entire staff was hamstrung and unable to handle my client load. If I recall correctly, they said they'd need 2 new salesmen just to handle my client load, not to mention my managerial work. They eventually begged me to come back, apologized for the whole thing, and even reduced my workload by distributing some of my more menial responsibilities. The pay wasn't increased, but I had more free time, and I think my company had a lot more respect for exactly what kind of a person I was as a salesman and as an assistant regional manager. This all seems like in hindsight kind of a piece, but let's be real. If you knew that better options existed out there, and you knew that you were handling at least 50% of sales for the entire office, when they begged you back, you should have negotiated for better pay. Either that or go and find one of the better options and enjoy that. But again, it's all hindsight, misplaced loyalty. Our next story is by Dr.Kaii. Don't want to hand over your drink before driving a bus of teenagers through the mountains? One time, my class, 18 to 19-year-old boys, went on a cultural trip. It was to a destination up steep mountains and plenty of very up and down and sharp turn, terrifying roads with sheer drops and not so practical railing, and not even that sometimes. What made it even more terrifying, by about 100-fold, was our driver. He was an absolute nutcase who would crack down these roads at top speed, not slowing for blind corners. In a bus! Basically a free roam roller coaster. Seriously, thinking back, it was a pure miracle this ex-army guy never crashed in all his years of driving our class and doing these sorts of trips. And insane, he was never fired. It was in a pretty crazy country. There's lots of mountainous terrain and winding roads with steep drops, and it's not too rare to see the wreck of a car that has fallen off at the bottom of one of those drops, but it hadn't been practical yet to remove. I know he'd been there a while. Given how well he knew the roads, he must have done the trip dozens of times, but I don't know how long he stayed after I left. Thankfully, most of the time our trips weren't on dangerous roads, but he always made me feel uneasy with his very intense driving. Anyway, so we are at our destination and still have to make our way home when the trip is over, at night, without any real streetlights on most of this. As we are milling around, I notice the driver has a plastic cup full to the brim with a 45% 90 proof spirit. I promise you I am not exaggerating. He was even showing off about it. I can take my drink, but that amount would have me smashed off my face. A fifth of it was probably way beyond the legal limit. I kid you not, this guy is planning on drinking the whole lot and has no clue what could possibly be wrong with that. Drunk driving is definitely illegal in this country, and it's not a corrupt country, but it's also a pretty laid-back country. And also, he is our only driver home, and everyone likes him, and I don't know, it's a very surreal situation. I go over, and being a 19-year-old talking to an ex-military nutcase who doesn't speak English very well, I try my best to make him realize, without offending him, that he shouldn't be drinking that. It's dangerous, etc. He's not having any of it, and he's in a very jovial mood, laughing me off. For a while, it seems like I'm the only one who notices or cares. As I said, it's very surreal. I can't even get our teachers to go up to him because they are not quite sure what to do either. So fine, he wants to keep the drink? I go to everyone I can find and ask them all to go grab a plastic cup and ask him if they can have some of his drink, in a party spirit. He's from the type of culture that if someone comes over with a smile and a big happy greeting and handshake and holds out a cup asking for a bit of your alcoholic beverage, you would be compelled to pour him a generous amount with a reciprocal pat on the back and hearty laugh. It seems, after all, I am not the only one terrified by this prospect, yet too awkward to make a scene because in no time, he's given away his entire cup and the bottle itself has disappeared. I saw he seemed quite sad after this, and I actually felt a little sorry for him, but not regretful. I think he still did manage to get a few sips in because I gained a few nice early gray hairs from the return trip, but thankfully I am still here to tell the tale. I am proud of my younger self for that quick thinking that very likely saved the lives of 50 or so people without causing the slightest amount of fuss. Or thanks. 19-year-olds, huh? My only comment is, considering this is how the driver handled themselves, they must have been a pretty good driver, having taken those trips dozens of times and, well, not fallen off cliffs, I guess. That doesn't make up for any of the drinking though, for sure. And our final story of the day is by Cardigan Baby 45, A Simple Preposition. My first experience with malicious compliance came in 7th grade. We had a teacher who decided to punish us all for a few people who wouldn't stop talking by giving us a test. Basically, he gave us a list of 150 prepositions and told us that in 3 days, we'd come into class and have to be able to list them all from memory on a piece of paper. Oh, and this test would take up the place of one of our normal unit tests, so it would have a big effect on our grade. Cue a whole bunch of middle school panic attacks, as I think most adults would struggle to memorize that. Well, my mom and I worked and I figured out how to set them to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. I was a strange kid. The morning of the tests, I was one of the very few confident that I could do it. As he handed out a few sheets of paper, the teacher got a ton of questions and finally yelled at us that this was an easy task and we could have duplicates or any order, so long as we got them down on the page. He then did one of those kind of threatening, "Any other questions?" things before telling us we had 30 minutes. Well, because I had them memorized, I was done pretty fast. I then looked around and realized that everyone was panicking. One girl was literally crying and the teacher was watching, super uncomfortable. And it suddenly clicked that I could make this a nightmare for him to grade. So I asked for another sheet of paper, which he gave, and then spent the rest of the time reordering them out of alphabetical order and into a random mess of duplicates. I then made sure to make my original, perfect paper unrecognizable. I got a reasonably high score, I missed a few in my scramble, and the teacher actually commented that my test took him longer to grade than anything else he had ever graded. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. If you're going to give a bunch of your kids a nightmare test like this, then I'm glad that OP went and made it a nightmare for them to grade. At least waste a bunch of their time needlessly, because that's really not any way to treat your students. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you have a favorite story of the day, let me know which one and why in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe if you haven't, and turn on notifications so you'll never miss an upcoming video from the Storytime channel. Every little thing that you do helps the channel grow that much more, so no matter what you did, thank you for supporting me right here on the Storytime channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time right here.